Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
And good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 10th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather situation. The current observations, satellite and radar pictures, and a whole lot more is always online for you at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line's open at 800-472-0391. You can find information during your day on Twitter from NWS Juneau, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Alaska, as well as NWS Anchorage. And NWS Alaska is also on Facebook. You can get information from YouTube in the late afternoon, get a briefing from NWS Anchorage. It's about 2.5 minutes long, and we'll give you an overview of what's happening all around Alaska. And then after this broadcast on alaskapublic.org and the YouTube channel AKwx TV, you'll find this complete broadcast here a little bit after the show. Here's what's going on right now as far as hazardous weather goes. It's mainly due to wind right now. We've got low pressure out in the Bering Sea. It's still that same system that was lurking out in the western Bering as we began the weekend, and now it's a lot more diffuse. However, it's still pumping in a great deal of southerly winds up and over the range and through gaps, and because of that, and especially in channeled terrain, we're going to have a lot more gusts. Gusts on the order of 50 to perhaps even 60 miles per hour for areas west of the Tote Cutoff should be expected in the eastern Alaska range. That wind advisory is going to go until about 9 o'clock tonight. For the upper Kuskokwim Valley, starting at around 6 a.m. tomorrow and going until Wednesday, we're expecting winds there to be a little more steady and gusty at times, upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour, again around the upper Kuskokwim Valley for some areas on the other side of the western Alaska range. That starts tomorrow morning. A high wind watch is in effect for tomorrow as well for the Bristol Bay region. We're expecting gusts there to reach upwards of 80 to 90 miles per hour if conditions continue to point in that direction of the forecast. So we're watching to see if that firms up a little bit. Right now it's a watch, which means watch out. If we have a warning, that means it's probably going to happen. A wind advisory would be a little bit less intense than a warning at this point. So again, a high wind watch for the Bristol Bay region for some stronger gusts that could develop and increase throughout the daytime tomorrow. Here's a look at what else is going on out across the western Bering Sea coast. You can see our low pressure system south and west of St. Lawrence Island and still north and east of Shemya, west of the Pribilofs. As it spirals here, it's also kind of backing up a little bit more toward eastern sections of Siberia and Asia. It's dragging in that colder air, and you can see that kind of mackerel sky developing here across the central and western Aleutians, a sign that there's plenty of cold air trying to work its way eastward, but it's moderating a lot as it moves back into the North Pacific. The main moisture channel from the Pacific is being pushed to the south, and that's what you're seeing right here is any moisture coming up out of the tropics is being pushed very far down to the south. Watch the loop one more time, and as that low pressure system continues to back up a little bit more, we're getting more into that southerly flow, not only for the Gulf of Alaska, but also for the west coast. That warm air is traveling further and further north and into the Bering Strait, and that means any precipitation that works its way up the west coast in the coming days might not just be rain, it might be rain mixed with snow in some cases. And again, that southerly flow could be a little bit stronger around the Bristol Bay communities and perhaps some parts of the YK Delta, just a little bit more than breezy at times. Here's a look at the bigger picture across all of Alaska now, and you'll notice southeast is kind of cleared up a little bit. Some breaks in the cloud cover for you, but it's also pretty evident that there's a lot of moisture that's working over the Gulf, and that stronger southerly flow is going to start working its way backward a little bit over south central and eventually leaning back over toward Kodiak Island. While being the first to experience and tap into what could be a little bit more than a fire hose, you're expected to see several inches of rain from that. And we're going to keep an eye on this because as more and more rain moves over the island, it's possible that you could get some several inches of rain. On top of that, probably some decent amount of runoff. If that affects some of the hillsides there, you might see the potential for some mudslides. So if you're in one of those areas that suffers from that when you get several inches of rain all at once, you might want to keep a watch on some of those more predictable hillsides there. And just keep watch of some of the rainfall you're getting. Any reports we have from Kodiak or the surrounding hillsides, we'd love to see your pictures and love to hear about how much rain you're getting. You can also call the Weather Service office there in Kodiak and relay that information to them. Now, as the wind is moving up and over the Alaska Range, you can already see some of the drier air developing on the leeward side. That's going to include Fairbanks, so it looks like a relatively dry situation for the middle and upper Yukon Valley as a result. Clouds are reforming as they reach over the Brooks Range on the windward side, and we still have some cloud cover across the Arctic coast. Moisture will continue traveling up the west coast in the coming days as well, so watch for more scattered precipitation there. Today's weather, though, showed high pressure shutting down the winds a lot more so over southeast than you'd had for recent days. 1,028 millibar high here, and that's just an extension, I'll step out of the way, of a 1,048 millibar high across British Columbia and some of the western sections of Canada. That, combined with low pressure, which is nothing more than a vacuum out across the Bering, working to provide a pretty steady southerly flow right up the west coast and across southeast and south central Alaska. A few pockets of rain earlier today, some of that across Valdez and Cordova, Cold Bay, and also a little bit around the Pribilofs. Most of what you're seeing, though, is just cloud cover traveling northward. As we get into tonight, expect wide areas of light and scattered precipitation across southwestern Alaska, perhaps the central Aleutians, the Pribilof, St. Matthew, all the way up through the Bering Strait. And once you get a little bit more inland, places like McGrath and perhaps into Grayling, you might experience a few snow showers there, also across the Noatak and Kobuk valleys and the interior of the Seward Peninsula. Most of what we're expecting, though, to really focus on more populated areas would be more of that southeasterly flow starting to reach into Kodiak, and you can expect some moderate to occasionally heavy rain as we start into tonight and into tomorrow as warmer southeasterly winds start to run right into Kodiak Island and even south central Alaska. Should see some rain showers there. Look for the lower and middle Yukon Valley to experience some light snowfall. Just a little bit further west, though, where that warmer air is still infiltrating the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, look for pockets of rain and snow showers to mix. Across northwestern Alaska, there's a better chance you'll see some scattered snow, and low pressure is still out across the northwestern Bering at 982 millibars. In fact, it grabs a little piece of colder air and starts to move that from west to east across the western chain. And in that area, we might see more of a rain-snow mix, but just about all places like Adak, Atka, Cold Bay, Unalaska, Nikolsky, anywhere along the chain in the Aleutians should predominantly see rainfall as we go into tomorrow. Looks like it might start to be a little breezier across southeastern Alaska, but for right now, you're on the drier side of the weather. High pressure shows 1,030 millibars as we get into Wednesday. The greater effect of that is still out to the east, but we still have pretty broad areas of low pressure across the Bering Sea. That continues, that broad southeasterly flow, and again, Kodiak still needs to be watchful. For southwestern Alaska, periods of rain continue, a rain-snow mix all the way into places like Nome and even into Kotzebue. Northward, a better chance for some snowfall, including Kivalina, Point Hope, and Point Lay. Westward, it's mainly rainfall for you, but there might be some more breezes west of Kiska. More of a low pressure and unsettled pattern sitting right over Dutch Harbor in Alaska for Wednesday. And the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta looking more cloudy and unsettled than just about anywhere else in Alaska at this point. For southeast today, temperatures were in the mid to upper 40s in some areas. A little bit further south and east, though. Ketchikan, Metlakatla up toward Hyder, probably right around, let's say Sitka 42. Petersburg, a little bit cooler there, but most areas were in the 40s with the exception of this little cold pocket just kind of hovering right about here. Around southern sections of Yukon, it was single-digit territory. From Whitehorse and westward, you saw temperatures kind of fluctuate from the teens and 20s. Off the road toward Fairbanks, 30 degrees. Down across the mountains, 20s and 30s there for Healy and Fort Greely. And then south central, Squintina, Talkeetna in the 30s and 40s. Homer was a much milder 50 degrees, one of the warmer spots in the entire state today. Meanwhile, Eagle and Northway saw temperatures ranging from the single digits to the lower 30s. Fort Yukon saw 7 degrees, 30 in Arctic Village and, Anaktuvuk Pass, low to mid-20s for the Arctic coast as you got around west of Barrow to Wainwright and points south and west, lower to mid-30s were seen. Kotzebue Sound temperatures were in the mid to upper 30s. Nome was only 35. Unalakleet was showing 39. Areas around Galena and Ruby were in the 30s today. The YK coastline in the 30s and 40s. Bethel 41 degrees with McGrath in the upper 30s. Bristol Bay saw temperatures in the mid 40s, about the same as what you experienced in Kodiak. Lower to mid 40s for a good chunk of the Alaska Peninsula. 41 in St. Paul. St. George was 39. And Adak and Atka were in the upper 30s to lower 40s with Shemya at 36. Now overnight low temperatures will be the coldest in the interior with mainly a clear sky generally west east of Fairbanks and northward. Single digits there for Fort Yukon, 6 in Arctic Village, 16 in Barrow. The western regions of Alaska generally in the lower to mid-30s, 36 in Nunivak Island, Bristol Bay in the mid-30s. The Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s to lower 40s, St. Paul 39, Kodiak 41, South Central in the lower 30s, and southeast, upper 20s to lower 30s for you. With high temperatures tomorrow, probably making it into the lower to mid-40s for many in southeast. The further out toward the coast you go, you'll likely be tapping that 50-degree mark. Lower 40s for Prince William Sound, just about 50 in Kodiak. And central and interior locations, probably lower 30s. Most areas around the Yukon Flats will dip into the teens. High temps tomorrow in the north coast around the lower 30s. The Seward Peninsula also in the mid to upper 30s. Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, upper 30s to about 40. Around Bethel, 37. Dillingham and King Salmon also in the lower 40s, with the Alaska Peninsula back in the mid-40s and the Pribilofs at 43. Flying weather tomorrow includes IFR from the Gulf of Vanadier all the way out to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Some pockets of that generally north into the Norton Sound communities there in the lower Yukon Valley. IFR conditions around the western Alaska Range passes and also on the coastal areas around Seward and points south toward the Barren Islands and around Kodiak Island, again with that southeasterly flow bringing a wealth of moisture your way. Let's check your pass conditions. Anaktuvik Pass expected to see some improvements during the day. We expect some improvement for Adigan Pass through the day as well. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see IFR conditions through a good part of the day for Tuesday. Rainy Pass is also expected to be IFR. Windy Pass should see VFR conditions developing as the day goes on. Isabel Pass expected to be instrument flight rule. And plenty of clouds to the west, but Mentasta Pass right now we expect to see visual flight rule conditions there and will trend in that direction for Tenita after starting out the day at IFR. Portage Pass will likely be listed at IFR through most of the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass get a day off with VFR conditions for your Tuesday. Freezing levels show that warm air surging northward, but mainly at the surface. You see the overrunning conditions taking shape across the interior with freezing levels as high as 2,000 and 4,000 feet around the Yukon Valley all the way up toward the Arctic coast. And the warmth is really focused on the eastern Gulf right now, those levels from 4 to as high as 10,000 feet. But the surface freezing line sure takes a hard dig southward across the Alaska Range and runs around the eastern Gulf Coast all the way through southeastern Alaska. So there is some warm air to be had out in the west, but not a whole lot to support it up top. Icing potential has some of that problem wrapped into it there. You can see the occasional, maybe even widespread moderate icing potential generally west of the Alaska Range and east of Norton Sound above 4,000 feet. Some of that will be found over Kodiak as well, but that warm air is also trying to work its way westward. Look for a broad area of kind of hit and miss icing across the Bering Sea. Most of that's going to be above about 6,000 feet and below 14,000 feet. Some of that occasionally reaching occasional moderate. As we look at the jet stream, you'll notice a pretty deep trough still working its way into the Gulf of Alaska and even further southward. However, as this is working a southeasterly flow in the upper levels back toward Kodiak, that's going to latch onto some of that moisture that's well down to the south and bring that back into Alaska. A high pressure ridge is seen south of Haida Gwaii and just north of the Pacific Northwest. This upside down U-shaped pattern is an Obenga block, and that's going to lock in this weather pattern at least for a good part of the week, keeping most of Alaska in above normal temperatures and probably above normal precipitation for especially areas west of the Kenai Peninsula. At 9,000 feet, you can see that southeasterly flow working over the west coast and into the interior. Wind speeds coming out of the Gulf at 40 to 55 knots. A south and easterly offshore flow working through southeastern Alaska thanks to high pressure across northern sections of Canada. Our low pressure system is kind of easing back a little bit more across the Bering Sea. Those wind speeds coming in from the west and northwest through the Aleutian chain at 55 to 60 knots and making their way up toward the northern Bering at about 40 knots from the south and east. At 3,000 feet, pretty much the same story here. We've got southeasterlies working their way into the Bering Strait, a west and southwesterly flow trying to develop here across the central and western chain. Southeasterly winds still going strong across the Gulf with wind speeds there from 45 to 50 knots for the interior, as low as 10 knots and as high as about 45 knots across the middle Yukon Valley. And winds are considerably lighter across the south side of high pressure that is pushing very little air right now into southeastern Alaska. Turbulence potential then will be focused from the Portage Valley all the way into the Mat-Su. Watch for some occasional chop there across Kodiak Island, the Barren Islands, and into the Bristol Bay region, especially with the effects of those surface winds that could bring high winds up during the daytime tomorrow and increase those Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday. Occasional moderate is expected around the Kotzebue Sound region, especially in the western edge of the Brooks Range, below 5,000 feet around the Bering Strait, and also across the central and western chain, generally below 6,000 feet, and really focused on some of the higher terrain around the central and western Aleutians. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening, our guest is Donnie Hatch. Donnie is the West Coast Distribution Manager for DeLorme. Donnie has a very interesting resume, which includes a degree in Russian studies and 15 years with Global Star, a satellite communications company. Many of those years he spent in Moscow. He currently lives and works in Portland, in the Portland area. No stranger to aviation, Donnie's been to Oshkosh, I think he told me, for the last 10 years. And in fact, I met him at the Great Alaskan Aviation Gathering last spring. Donnie, welcome to Hangar Flying.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Donnie, one of the themes I've spoken about on our program is the value of flight tracking devices, which I always refer to as breadcrumb technology because they leave a trail like a breadcrumb trail. Your company makes some of these devices called inReach. One of these I've used, in fact, the SE, I think that's called the Screen Edition.
Yes, Screen Edition.
Remind our audience what breadcrumb technology is and the products you offer.
Sure, absolutely. So we manufacture at our head office in Maine the DeLorme inReach two-way satellite communicator. The inReach is a two-way satellite communications device which has, on the one hand, a built-in GPS receiver, so the device always knows where it's at, and a two-way iridium-based satellite modem that broadcasts the user's location at selected time intervals live to the web. So our breadcrumb technology enables a pilot to broadcast their current location as well as their past or their historical route live on the internet. And we do so in broadcasting those GPS coordinates live to the website in tracking mode, leaving behind that breadcrumb trail. We also broadcast for the user additional valuable information as it relates to a flight or a flight plan, which would include speed, altitude, and even heading.
So I've been enamored with this technology for some time because I think it is a game changer. And for our audience, what they need to realize is that not only are they laying down this track of breadcrumbs, but people can see what that looks like on handheld devices, on computers. And so if you have a family member or somebody who wants to know where you are, they can in real time see where that track is. I think that's an amazing technology, and I've pushed it. Now I will kind of, as a disclaimer, say there are other products out there, there's other companies out there, and the most important thing to me is that people get into this business, and I think your product is excellent. I personally use it. Talk a little bit about some of the other features. One of them, which I think is very important, is the two-way texting capability.
Yes, absolutely. The inReach devices allow users to send and receive 160-character text messages from any place on Earth, and for that matter, any place within the state of Alaska. And those text messages can be sent to any cellular phone or any email address. So we've engineered the device as a consumer, handheld, low-cost device that operates just like any other user is accustomed to using their cellular phone. The beauty of the inReach device is that not only can it be used in what we call standalone mode by using the built-in QWERTY keyboard, but our devices are also compatible with mobile devices, whereby you can pair up the inReach via Bluetooth connection to most smartphones and most tablets, which, as we know, most pilots these days have in the cockpit of their airplane. And so it allows them flexibility in terms of how the text messaging is used, and certainly allows them flexibility to whom they send those messages. Because the inReach devices have built-in GPS receivers, every text message that gets broadcast out is accompanied with the user's location. So if you're out flying, for example, and let's say you fly through Rainy Pass and you send me a text message just to check in and let me know that you're okay, you don't have to take the time to say, Donnie, I'm at 62 degrees north and 153 west, for example. It's already embedded in the message. So the simplicity of operating the device is something that we're very proud of.
You know, we're going to run out of time. I'd like to get you on again because there's a couple of other features I'd like you to talk about. And also I'd like to review for our viewers some of the real benefits from a device like this. So I'll get you back on and we'll pick up where we left off.
Great, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, brought to you by the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Again, we are a member-supported organization. Time to renew your membership, www.aasfonline.org. And also I want to remind you, on the 15th, we're going to have our fall safety seminar, going to be at the Lusac Library. Registration starts at 8 o'clock, November 15th. It's going to be a really good program, and you're going to want to be there. And in the meantime, fly safe.
Time for an update of Western Alaska's sea ice conditions. You can see a lot of ice developing along the shore there. A lot of what we were seeing across South and Western Alaska got a little too warm there. Watch for a lot of changes in the coming days with a warm air traveling up over the west coast. But across the Arctic coast, a lot of that is filling in there. And now Barrow has lost enough open water there that we have taken away the sea high forecast there, which you'll see in the marine charts in just a few minutes. So winter's still on the way, even though it's warm for many locations across Alaska. In southeastern Alaska, northerlies up to 20 knots out of the Lynn Canal with 4-foot seas there. Northeasterlies through the central inner waterways and more of an easterly flow coming through the Clarence Strait at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Those offshore winds continue south of Sitka. And as you get northward into Gustavus and some of the offshore areas there, a southeasterly flow from 20 to 25 knots extends all the way up toward the coast, Yakutat, and there may be some higher gusts there on Tuesday. For Wednesday, there will be some pockets of higher gusts, but generally a northerly flow coming down through the inner channels, more of an easterly flow across the Clarence Strait, all at around 20 knots or so with 3 to 4-foot seas. And the easterlies are also working their way northward now, so you see those blowing offshore from 25 knots with 9 to 11-foot seas. Southeasterlies continue outside of Yakutat at 20 knots with a 9-foot sea there on Wednesday. Across Prince William Sound, more of a stronger breeze, 30-knot flow at 7-foot seas are expected there with 40 knots across the north and western Gulf. Southeasterlies coming into Kodiak again, bringing some rain and probably some wind at times. Northeasterlies coming down the Cook Inlet at 25 to 30 knots. Seas there 6 to 8 feet. West of the Barrens, you'll see a 12-foot sea, and through Shelikof Strait, 25 knots with a northeasterly wind and a 7-foot sea there on Tuesday. As we get into Wednesday, expect those winds to continue from the north and the east. A little bit stronger of a flow coming across the Barrens, around 45 knots or so. 17 to 18-foot seas will develop there, 12 to 15-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. Inside Prince William Sound, though, things should improve. A variable and light flow at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea over Kodiak Island. 10-knot winds there on Shelikof Strait. 19-foot seas there, 10-foot seas inside Shelikof Strait, 19-foot seas there east of Kodiak Island, and the winds are up to 40 knots from the east and southeast. Now across the Alaska Peninsula, an easterly flow inside of Bristol Bay, a 5-foot sea there, 10 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side. Southeasterly flow coming over the Alaska Peninsula at 20 knots, and as that extends into the Bering Sea, that'll keep that warmer air working northward as well. So generally speaking, the winds aren't as strong as they have been. You'll see them come back up on Wednesday, 25 knots there on the Bering Sea side, 15 to 20 knots on the Pacific side, 10 to 12-foot seas there to the south, 4 to 7-foot seas in the north. A little bit windier there on the lee of the Alaska Peninsula. North and westerly winds through the central and eastern chain as we get into Tuesday. Some of the stronger flow will be across the Pacific Islands, Pacific side of that. 14-foot seas are expected there. 30-knot winds for the west and west central areas, a 17-foot sea from Kiska all the way out toward Attu. As we get into Wednesday, the winds are still hovering around 20 to 25 knots, generally from the west and northwest. 10 to 15 knots on the Bering Sea coast side, and the Pacific side looking at 10 to 12-foot seas, 9 to 15-foot seas there in the west, still coming in from the north and west with 20 to 25-knot winds. The west coast, a broad southeasterly flow will continue there from the YK Delta all the way up towards St. Lawrence Island. 25 to 30 knot flow coming in with 9 to 10 foot seas. The St. Matthew Island waters looking at 12 foot seas and 14 foot seas around the Pribilofs with a southerly flow. That diminishes as we get into Wednesday. A 10 knot wind there at best. 8 foot seas are expected, more of a south and easterly flow cutting across Kuskokwim Bay and St. Lawrence Island region with a 5 foot sea there. Variable flow though north of Nunivak Island and easterlies around the St. Matthew Island waters at 15 knots with a 10 foot sea. Across the Arctic coast, again that ice is filling in from Kaktovik all the way to Barrow and to Wayne right now, more of a south and southeasterly flow. From Cape Lisburne southward into the Kotzebue Sound region, we are looking at a little bit of a stronger breeze at 30 knots with a 7 to 8 foot sea. By Wednesday, you'll see that easterly flow working across the Beaufort Seacoast at 20 to 25 knots. South of Cape Lisburne, that's a 15 to 25 knot wind from the south and east with a 4 to 5 foot sea. Recapping tonight's weather, you'll notice warmer air is working back into the Gulf. That moisture channel has been pointed a little bit further north. It's going to push a little bit more to the west and southwest with time. That's going to bring a lot of rain into Kodiak and some areas across the southwestern coastlines. That warmer air continues to spread northward toward the Bering Strait, Norton Sound, and the southwestern coast of Bristol Bay, and even the Alaska Peninsula. Thanks to high pressure across the east, things are going to be fairly quiet for southeastern Alaska. Breezy but dry, it looks like, and many north of the Yukon Valley, especially east of Fairbanks, will have some colder but clear nights. Unsettled weather continues in the Bering as low pressure continues to fill in and weaken as we go ahead in time. As we get to Tuesday, you'll notice a 982 millibar low there, trying to push some colder weather southward. But the real effect of this will be that warm and wet air that's moving northward and into more parts of Alaska across the lower and middle Kuskokwim and Yukon valleys there. Periods of snow for more areas in the interior and a better chance for seeing scattered showers from Cook Inlet southward through the Kenai Peninsula and a better chance for even heavier rainfall across Kodiak Island. For Wednesday's forecast, low pressure is creeping toward the west coast a little bit more. You may see some rain and snow showers there. Snow across the northwestern coastlines of the Chukchi Sea, and rain continues for south central and parts of Kodiak Island. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.